Hey guys, what's going on? Mike the Caveman Q here again, Paleo Problem Island, MikeTheCaveman.com. Another edition of Monday Nights with Mike, live stream Q&A, ask me anything, health related. Sorry about that, had to actually change the Wi-Fi I was on, so we had the wrong one up, but you know the deal. So we're here, ask me anything, like we said, health related, or whatever else you're feeling like. From there, what we're going to do is we're going to move forward and we're going to cover a topic about frozen vegetables. That's the current one we're looking at. But obviously, it's open Q&A. You can ask me whatever the heck you want. So, yeah. Having said that, what we're going to do is we'll pull up the study right here. And this was a paper that was published by Buzari, Holstage, and Barrett. And it was in the Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry. So yeah, this was what year was this? 2014. All right. So hey, let's see who's on. All right. So real quick, when we're talking about frozen versus fresh vegetables, obviously if you can get them locally, that's going to be the best bet. So if you are either growing your own fruits and vegetables or you are sourcing them from a farmer's market or you know the farmer personally, that's always going to be your best bet. But if it comes down to the case of you have to buy them at a supermarket, you may actually be better off in a lot of cases using the frozen ones because when you buy frozen, what they do is they pick them at peak ripeness and they go and they flash freeze them. Canning seems to show a lot of similar benefit, but yeah. So, 4 vitamins were analyzed in several fruit and vegetable commodities to evaluate the differences between fresh and frozen produce. Ascorbic acid, riboflavin, alpha tocopherol, and beta carotene were evaluated in corn, carrots, broccoli, spinach, peas, green beans, strawberries, and blueberries. Now, of course, those of you who know me know that effect they're including corn, green beans, and peas create a little bit of a problem for me in the fact that, corn is a grain, peas and green beans, of course, are legumes, but, whatever. I'm not going to stress too much. Now, samples of each commodity were harvested and processed and analyzed for each nutrient content at 3 storage times per treatment. Ascorbic acid showed no significant difference for 5 of the 8 commodities and was higher in frozen samples than fresh for the remaining 3. So, in 3 out of the 8 of the fruits and vegetables, grains and legumes that they tested, well, they actually had either equal or higher amounts of ascorbic acid. From there, apart from broccoli and peas, which were higher and lower in frozen versus fresh samples respectively, none of the commodities showed significant differences with respect to riboflavin, which is a B vitamin. 3 commodities had higher levels of alpha tocopherol. I can't pronounce that right now. Alpha tocopherol, which is a vitamin E, in the frozen samples, while the remaining commodities showed no significant difference between fresh and frozen. So that's vitamin E, well, one of the types of vitamin E, and in the frozen one, 3 of the 8 were higher, and in the other 5, no big difference. Okay. Peas, carrots, and spinach were lower in beta carotene in the frozen samples, while green beans and spinach showed no significant difference between the 2 storage methods. So in that one, in the beta carotene, which is vitamin A precursor, the plant version, well, they actually were lower in the frozen samples. So peas, carrots, and spinach lost it, but in the others, there was no significant difference. Overall, the vitamin content of the frozen commodities was comparable to and occasionally higher than their fresh counterparts. Beta carotene, however, was found to decrease drastically in some commodities. So, similar to what I was saying before, is that for the most part, when we're looking at these types of fruits and vegetables, you may be better off buying frozen if you can't make it grow it yourself or otherwise. But let's move it through in a second. Quick Coastal Crafts break. I swear they're not sponsoring me, although at this point they probably should be. All right. Consumption of fruits and vegetables plays an important role in preventing disease and maintaining positive overall health. Ideally, these foods and fruits would be consumed immediately after harvest. However, most fresh produce arrives to the consumer several days to weeks after it's harvested. During this time, cellular respiration and oxidation can cause substantial nutrient degradation. To halt spoilage and eliminate pathogens, food processing methods such as blanching and freezing have been developed. While some organoleptic degradation had been previously noted in these products, It has been found that the nutrient degradation suffered by foods during processing is less substantial than that which occurs over prolonged post-harvest holding periods of fresh produce. Basically, what they're saying there is that while there was, historically during research, a little bit of loss from freezing these or from blanching them, the process of transporting them, so post-harvest, transporting them as fresh produce, not freezing or canning them, well, that actually leads to a bigger problem. So it is less substantial than that which occurs in that. So it's actually better, is what they were seeming to say, in terms of halting spoilage and preventing pathogens. But in this study, they are seeking to evaluate the effects of freezing and frozen storage on the vitamin content of peas, green beans, broccoli, spinach, corn, carrots, strawberries, and blueberries. Most previous studies on the topic, however, were carried out on purchased produce at a market. This introduces a level of uncertainty with regard to the history of the samples, including soil and climate quality during the growing season, ripeness at harvest, handling, shipping, and storage. To minimize these sources of uncertainty, all commodities were harvested directly from their source, immediately processed, and used for both fresh and frozen storage studies. Vitamins are typically categorized as either water or fat soluble. Water soluble vitamins, ascorbic acid, and riboflavin, and fat soluble alpha tocopherol, got it right that time, and beta carotene were used to evaluate vitamin degradation. Ascorbic acid is one of the most heat-labile vitamins. Its relatively low stability makes it an ideal indicator of the effects of processing on degradation of nutrients. This is based on the idea that given process leave ascorbic acid levels relatively unchanged. It is likely that most other nutrients have survived the process as well. So basically, if vitamin C doesn't get jacked up, it's probably all going to make it through. Cool? Degradation of ascorbic acid has been shown to be vary dramatically among different commodities, and even various cultivars of the same commodity can exhibit different trends of ascorbic acid retention. In fresh produce, ascorbic acid begins to degrade quickly soon after the produce is harvested. The refrigeration helps to slow this degradation, but frozen storage is effective in preserving ascorbic acid, but the blanching process prior to freezing often causes significant decrease in the, causes significant degradation in addition to leaching into the blanched water. So basically, the water pulls out some of it. So the water pulls out some of what you have in that vitamin because it's water soluble. So steam blanching, or rather blanching in general, may not be the best. So steam blanching results in less leaching of water soluble nutrients than water blanching. So using steam versus boiling is essentially the key, or parboiling, as it were. Now, riboflavin can be degraded during thermal processing. Riboflavin is light sensitive, and thus both food products. Hey, Lilian, how you doing? So the food products must be stored carefully to avoid exposure. Riboflavin levels in processed products that are blanched have been shown to decrease due to leaching into the blanched water. Riboflavin is readily degraded during ambient temperature storage of fresh produce, and research has shown that some minor degradation occurs at temperatures encountered during the frozen stage as well. So, research has indicated that vitamin B appears to have both temperature, light, and a little bit in terms of frozen loss. Unlike the water-soluble vitamins, alpha tocopherol is not prone to leaching during water-based processing steps, such as blanching. Well, that would make sense because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. But it has been found in some studies that alpha tocopherol vitamin E content appears to increase to a certain extent during thermal processing, possibly due to increased extractability, before declining due to thermal degradation. So what they're saying there is that if you heat up the alpha tocopherol, heat up the vitamin E, well, over time it actually might get increased, so the bioavailability, the not absorbed, increases a little bit over time, but then after a certain point, it starts to break down. So vitamin E is also susceptible to oxidative degradation, which can occur in both fresh and frozen storage. Basically, oxygen causes it to break down. So vitamin E is oxygen. It is susceptible to the breakdown from oxygen. Now, fat-soluble vitamin A is not normally found in fruits and vegetables. It is indirectly obtained through consumption of carotenoid compound beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is a metabolic precursor to vitamin A, and in fact, many dietary prescriptions of plant-based foods report a vitamin A correlation that is in fact based on the concentration of beta-carotene in the product. So, what they're saying there is that the actual amount of vitamin A, I did a video on that before, is that the amount of actual vitamin A you're getting in is not exactly what you think you're getting if you're talking about just fruits and vegetables. So carrots are not really a source of vitamin A, they're a source of the precursor beta carotene. And your body has to go and convert it there out. But beta carotene does not leach out of produce during washing and blanching, but is very sensitive to degradation due to oxidation. So that makes sense again because beta carotene, the vitamin A precursor, is a fat soluble vitamin. So water isn't going to do too much. So washing and heating it, not that big of a deal. But as a fat, it is going to be pretty um, it's going to be pretty susceptible to breakdown from oxygen. Now, this potential for oxidation is dependent on the various processing and storage conditions, which include exposure to high temperatures, light, and oxygen. Retention of beta carotene in frozen storage seems to vary by commodity, with studies showing decreases in different degrees in beta carotene over a prolonged period of time of frozen storage. This is in contrast to fresh storage, where there is reported to be little degradation. So basically, vitamin A, pretty shelf stable in fresh, but if you freeze it for a long time, probably not the best. So what they did is they took a bunch of raw materials. How they did that, they took vegetable seeds and they took from this company, and they had 6 replicate samples harvested from different randomly selected points along a linear curve. And what they did was they took again, they had spinach, carrots, blueberries, broccoli, peas, green beans, strawberries, and corn. And they were done at either UC Davis or at Fullberry Farm, which is in Ginda, California, Iacopi Farm, or Driscoll's. Driscoll's, those guys that have those strawberries everywhere. Nice. So you'll be able to tell whether or not your Driscoll strawberries are legit. But moving forward, all commodities were harvested at uniform maturity as determined by both color and approximate size, as recommended by the grower. And all commodities were transported to UC Davis and processed in refrigerated styrofoam coolers. That doesn't seem very. Yeah, having done studies and stuff before, I mean, it sounds about right. But anyway, throughout the processing and storage change, each of the 6 field replicates was maintained at as discrete samples. All commodities were given a preliminary rinse with water prior to entering the pilot plant to avoid unnecessary contamination of the facilities. So then they went through the flume wash and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they basically went through individual corn kernels were removed from the cob by hand. They did the peas and green beans were destemmed by hand. The broccoli was cut into florets. But for each of the field replicates of each commodity, they were clean paired samples were randomized and separated into 2 parts. Half of each were marked for fresh storage, while the others were blanched and frozen. The samples to be blanched were loaded onto the steam blanching line in a stainless steel basket. Then, following that, the samples were transferred onto a wire mesh. Yeah, so we'll move past there a little bit. But basically, what they did is they separated them out, making sure that some were fresh, some were not. So the first part of the study, there was a stability study. Basically, the fresh half of the field replicate was divided into 3 300-gram storages, which were located in a breathable tough R low-density polyethylene bag into a walk-in fridge. And from there, what they did is they took the frozen half and they were put into a freezer, whatever. Moving past, there was a homogenization, homogenization. That's the word I was looking for. Homogenization and sample preparation. Yeah, they used a Vitamix to basically blend those together and added 6 grams of deionized water for every 10 gram sample. So 6 to 10 parts of vegetable or water to vegetable. Now, they extracted the riboflavin, and again, gonna skip through all that for now. I've read through enough stupid parts of the methods. But if you really want to read, I'll put a link down in the description on YouTube after this plays back. But they went through or you know what? Actually, it's behind a paywall, so I'll actually go and post otherwise. But basically, they went through, they tested the vitamin B1, they tested the ascorbic acid, so vitamin C, tested the beta carotene, and they tested the alpha tocopherol, so vitamin E. Right, so we have here the storage time after 3 days, after 10 days, after no days, 3 days, and 10 days for the fresh, after 0 days, 10 days, and 90 days for the frozen. So basically, after a couple of days, after over a week, in the case of fresh, versus in the frozen, what they did is they took no days, a little over a week, and then 3 months later. They tested to see what the levels were like. And yeah, if you look over the course of 3 months, there was some loss, but in the case of certain ones, rather, in the case of the vitamin B and in the case of beta carotene, there was some major loss. Whereas if we're looking at, and sorry, to clarify, each one of these is slightly different. Each data point represents a different one. But if we look at these, again, there were no decreases. There was actually an increase in this one. There was a slight decrease here, an increase here, and a drastic decrease here. In some of the other ones, we see there was a slight decrease, there was a slight decrease, a slight increase, and then a major decrease. So the beta carotene, the vitamin A, was the one that was most susceptible to the damage being done overall. But we'll get more into that in a little bit. Basically, having went through all of that there, we can see here the ascorbic acid content of A, strawberries, that's the first graph, and B, green beans during fresh and frozen storage. Essentially, what we're looking at here are that the values on the dry weight, the values were the same letter A, B, C, D, are not significantly different. So we see here that at 0 days, there was no big difference between the two. They were picked from the same place and grown in the same place, the strawberries. At B, day 3, they only tested the fresh because they're going a little longer, and we see there was not really a huge change. And then, interestingly, after 10 days, it actually went up a little bit. So it actually went back to where it was. They tested it again, and interestingly, it was basically the same. Now, if we look at the vitamin C on the frozen at 0 days and 10 days, it remained almost identical to where it was, and there was no big difference between the two. And if we look, it was basically identical to where it was. So the fresh ones happened to be slightly higher to start, and they remained slightly higher. It was no change. Whereas after 90 days, the vitamin C content actually went up. It had a higher concentration of vitamin C. In the case of the green beans, same kind of concept. We see a decrease in vitamin C over time, over the fresh. It actually dropped pretty significantly there. Whereas after the case of the frozen, it stayed the same, and only a slight drop. So that's a big deal right there. But again, more on the extraction process of the different ones. We are really not going to read through that. But let's get to the results and discussion then. All right. So the concentrations of 4 different compounds were evaluated in 8 different commodities. So 4 vitamins and minerals and 8 different vegetables and or fruits and grains and legumes. And they were they were tested based on whether they were refrigerated or frozen over 3 different time points. So ascorbic acid was degraded less in frozen samples stored than in fresh samples, as we saw in figure 1. None of the 8 commodities showed losses during the frozen storage, meaning vitamin C stayed constant in all of them. In strawberries, carrots, peas, spinach, and broccoli, the ascorbic acid content of them was not significantly different from that of the frozen content. So fresh and frozen, vitamin C, no big change. But in corn, green beans, and blueberries, there were significantly higher levels of ascorbic acid were found in the frozen stored sample when compared to the fresh store. So this could possibly be attributed to arrested enzymatic activity and slowed oxidative degradation of ascorbic acid in the frozen samples. Basically, so enzymes can break down certain things. Oxidation, so oxygen, light, and heat can break down certain things as well in the frozen ones. That process simply wasn't happening. They were in storage for longer, which in turn allowed it to basically go up. Whereas in the case of the fresh ones, they were, even though we're in the refrigerator, the light and everything caused it to break down slightly quicker. So there was a significant decrease, even though it was after 10 days and after 90 days. So long and the short on those things, you're going to want to possibly go frozen. So blueberries, better off frozen. Extensive degradation of ascorbic acid in fresh stored produce has been previously reported in vegetables as compared to the frozen counterparts. So, whereas there is a major breakdown of vitamin C in fresh, in frozen, not quite as big a deal. Now, riboflavin, which is a B vitamin, was very well conserved in most frozen samples. Carrots, corn, broccoli, blueberries, and green beans all follow the same trend, with fresh samples containing the same riboflavin content as frozen samples, which again we can see in figure 2a, which is down here. And we'll break that down in a little bit. But figure 2a, of the 8 commodities tested as frozen samples, of the 8 commodities studied, only peas lost riboflavin during the frozen storage. So vitamin B stayed basically the same in all of them, with the exception of the peas, which lost some riboflavin. Now, the loss of riboflavin in peas is most likely due to oxidative degradation of the nutrients, same thing we were talking about before. Similar results were found in Glame et al., who noted large decreases in riboflavin in asparagus and spinach. Now, broccoli, figure 2c, actually had higher riboflavin content in the frozen stored versus fresh stored variety. So let's take a look at those actually. So these are regarding riboflavin right here. So that's 2a and 2b. So we said this was the first one. Of course, I zoomed down, didn't pay attention. First one again were the carrots, corn, blueberries, broccoli, and green beans right here. Hold on, let's test that. Green beans are A, peas are B, and broccoli is C. Sorry. Now that makes more sense. So looking at the riboflavin, that's those three. And as we see, there's actually an increase here. There's a slight decrease here. Then there is no change here. So in the case of the green beans, no real change in the frozen, slight increase on the fresh. In the case of the peas, we're looking at right here. Again, no change in the fresh, with actually a slight decrease in the frozen, which we said before. There is going to be a decrease in certain vegetables, but in this case, there was a major one in the peas. But what's interesting the most is the broccoli actually increased in the B vitamin over the course of this one. So in the case of the fresh and frozen, both saw increases, but it was a much more marked increase in the case of the frozen. So you actually saw more B vitamins at the end of the day from frozen broccoli versus fresh broccoli. So moving forward from there, broccoli, which we were saying, which was actually had a higher riboflavin content in fresh and frozen stored varieties. This contrasts with the majority of the literature as Mokloff et al., who found that while riboflavin content was higher in frozen vegetables than canned, it was not higher in frozen vegetables than fresh. Similarly, Van Duyn found riboflavin to be well retained in frozen peas, beans, and spinach, and it was not found to be present in any higher amounts in frozen produce to compare to fresh produce. So there is debate in the literature, but this particular one seemed to indicate that the B vitamin riboflavin actually still increased in broccoli and most of them overall, with the exception of peas. Either way, vitamin C and vitamin B, or one of the vitamin Bs, there's a whole bunch of them, both saw increases. So riboflavin, ascorbic acid, good thing. Alpha tocopherol, of all the nutrients determined in the study, the alpha tocopherol content in fruits and vegetables benefited the most from blanching, freezing, and frozen storage as compared to fresh storage. So again, this is one of the vitamin E's. And basically, fresh green beans had much better, rather, I skipped one right there. When stored fresh, peas, carrots, and corn showed significant decreases in alpha tocopherol content, so vitamin E. Fresh green beans had much lower levels of alpha tocopherol than frozen, but the levels of alpha tocopherol did not increase over the course of the fresh storage. In the remaining commodities, blueberries, broccoli, green beans, spinach, and strawberries, there was no significant difference between fresh and frozen, which we can see in figure 3. Now, frozen peas and green beans exhibited more than a twofold higher level of alpha tocopherol, while blueberries, spinach, and corn also had significantly higher levels of roughly 12 to 39% in frozen samples as compared to their fresh samples. So let's take a look at that real quick. We have here figure 3. We have peas on top and broccoli on bottom. And we have our fresh. We saw a slight increase in alpha tocopherol, whereas, and again, this is broccoli, whereas we saw a slight decrease, but then it remained steady for the frozen. For the fresh peas, there was a much lower level at baseline. That was interesting how that worked out, but much lower level, it got randomized that way. And we saw a slight decrease, whereas there was a completely steady remaining level of that vitamin E. Now, they observed higher levels of alpha tocopherol in some commodities, which is evident immediately after blanching and freezing on day 0, may be due to increased availability after steam blanching. So what they're saying there is that the reason why, that makes sense. The reason why the frozen ones might be a lot higher right here is that by blanching, by putting it through the steam blanching, by heating it up, it actually made the vitamin E more bioavailable. It made it more accessible to be utilized by, or at least not necessarily, to make it more accessible to be analyzed by the equipment. So the equipment was able to find it. So what they're saying there is that there may have been an increase on day 0 there because by steam blanching, by heating it up, it actually released more vitamin A. And this kind of comes in a little bit by talking about, steaming your food first, particularly vegetables. It actually does break down some of the anti-nutrients, but will also, in some cases, improve the bioavailability of certain foods, or at least release them out. So, alpha tocopherol levels in fresh broccoli were found to be more than twofold higher levels after heat treatments, such as steaming or boiling, by previous authors. The heat treatment administered in this study, however, the heat treatment administered during blanching could have a similar effect on the commodities in this study. Now, previous authors have not studied the effects of freezing on peas in any detail, but lipid oxidation in peas caused by enzymatic or non-enzymatic pathways has been reported to consume vitamin E, so alpha tocopherol, because it is a potent antioxidant. Basically, what they're saying is because vitamin E is utilized to basically neutralize, for simplicity's sake, to neutralize oxidative stress, what happens is they go and they interact, they counteract each other. In the process, it can be taken up, so you lose some of that vitamin E. Now, both of the oxidative pathways could have been responsible for preferentially lowering the levels of alpha tocopherol in fresh samples. It is also unlikely that any leaching of a fat-soluble alpha tocopherol would occur during blanching in an aqueous environment. Basically, what they're saying, because vitamin E is a fat-soluble vitamin, like dissolves like, right? So water likes water, fats like fats, fat-soluble vitamins. Generally speaking, if you're putting them in an aqueous or water environment, aren't going to break down and get degraded, or even leached out in this case, rather, from being blanched. So you're actually not going to lose any, and there may even be the increase because the blanching heats it up and the vitamin E becomes more available. So beta-carotene was not found in any significant amount in the blueberries, strawberries, and corn, and even in the fresh samples. Over the course of frozen storage, peas, spinach, and carrots showed losses of more than 50% of the initial beta-carotene content. So, peas, spinach, carrots, when they're frozen, do actually see a big loss in the vitamin A potential, or precursor. Well, I guess because it is a precursor, it's going to lead to more potential, but you get what I'm saying. It's not actually vitamin A. So the precursor to vitamin A, beta-carotene, does drop significantly in frozen spinach, peas, and carrots, which is unlike most of the other ones we've talked about so far. But over the course of fresh storage, peas, green beans, and carrots lost at least 15% of their initial beta-carotene content, meaning that there's still going to be a loss even if you do it fresh, but it's a difference of how much you're actually going to lose. And we can see that here in figure 4. So vitamin A, the precursor beta-carotene in carrots on top and green beans are on the bottom. And essentially we see here that in the initial phase, there is a slightly higher amount at fresh. From there, we see a little bit of a drop, whereas in the case of the frozen, there is a very large drop. In the case of the green beans, we started out with a slightly higher amount in vitamin A. We then see a leveling out on the fresh, but then it actually increases over time. Whereas in the case of the frozen, a slight drop, and then it even some more slightly raises. So pretty good stability in the case of the peas, or green beans rather. Sorry. Now, losses in beta-carotene occurred both immediately after processing and over the course of frozen storage. Losses during blanching are most likely to be related, most likely not related to the leaching, because beta-carotene is water insoluble. So like we said before, because vitamin A and its precursor beta-carotene is a fat-soluble vitamin, not gonna be a big deal. Blanching is water-based, so we'll be all right. Now, we may be able to attribute it to oxidation of beta-carotene. because it is water soluble, but may be attributed to the oxidation of beta carotene. So, meaning, again, fats more susceptible to being broken down by oxygen, light, and air, and in that process, well, air is oxygen, light, and heat, in that process, get broken down a little easier. Now, in all of the commodities that showed decreased levels of beta carotene, the 90-day frozen samples were by far the lowest levels detected. These decreases were most likely due to oxidation during the frozen storage, which was found to occur in previous studies by Desorbri et al. But these findings were most likely due to oxidation during the frozen storage. But these findings were most likely due to some other previous results. One explanation for such can be that there was a drastic decrease in the carrots. Is that extensive cell damage and larger surface area after dicing encourage oxidation of the tissue. Basically, what we're saying, hey, Shoshana, what's up? How you doing? You did make it. You haven't been on in a while. I don't know where you've been. So, we're talking right now vitamins, and we're talking about how they work on fruits and vegetables, frozen versus fresh. Right now, we're at vitamin A, like we were saying, and what we're talking about is a reason why we might lose it in the case of those carrots is that when they're diced, when they're cut up, more of them are getting exposed to the air and the light, and in that process, it gets oxidized, it's broken down. So in that process, we lose some of that beta carotene, that vitamin A precursor. Now, green beans, broccoli showed no significant differences in the beta carotene as a result of processing and storage. So in that broccoli and green beans, no big difference. So just to go back for a second, like we said before, these are vitamin beta carotene is vitamin A. We have alpha tocopherol, which is vitamin E, which we see there was a steady state over the time of the frozen. We have here, this is the vitamin B, is the riboflavin, which again, we see a solid steady state. And in the case of vitamin C, slight increases over time in the frozen vegetables. So frozen vegetables may actually be better off. Now, one more thing to rebound on that again with the vitamin E. Part of the reason why we might see a huge increase even at baseline is the fact that by blanching it before you freeze those vegetables, what ended up happening is it actually released some of it and then that maintained over the time. Now, if we have any questions, now be a good time to start putting them through. I'm about to make it through to my conclusion now from this one, and I'll do my own, to their conclusion first, and I'm going to go to my own conclusion from there, but after that, we'll see what's going on, see if anybody has their question. You can ask them now, too, because we only have the one paragraph. Otherwise, we're going to get rolling. But for most nutrients in the study, frozen versions of a given commodity present viable substitute. Let's try that one again, because apparently I can't read it with any kind of syntax. For most nutrients in the study, frozen versions of a given commodity present viable substitutes for fresh in terms of nutritional value. While the results were highly dependent on commodity and nutrient, there were certain trends within the specific nutrients. In frozen samples of the commodities analyzed, riboflavin, which is a B vitamin, alpha tocopherol, which is a vitamin E, and ascorbic acid, which is a vitamin C, were not only preserved in quantities equivalent to those of fresh samples, but in many cases were found in quantities much higher than those of their fresh samples. Gab, what's up? How you doing? Now, the most prevalent negative trend in the nutrient content of frozen fruits and vegetables is in beta carotene, which was drastically degraded over frozen storage in many of the commodities studied. So, in summary, the vast majority of the fruits and vegetables saw either no change or increases by freezing them versus keeping them fresh over time, whereas, with the exception of that being the beta carotene, which is the vitamin A precursor, we saw some significant drops in both fresh and frozen, but even more so in frozen. So we see this here, big drop. Now, in the case of the green beans, it actually did remain steady overall, but it actually increased while it was in the fresh state. So, yeah. Having said that, should you be eating frozen vegetables? Well, if you are looking for a cost-effective alternative and or you are time crunched, then yeah, it definitely might be a good idea. And the answer is, haven't done that in a while, yeah, I definitely recommend it. Particularly my clients, again, who I work with who, whether they have a really busy schedule for work, school, otherwise, a bag of frozen vegetables can be very easily prepared and you have no excuse. Whether ideally you cook it, either saute it up or you parboil it, steam it a little bit, or in the case of someone who's super time crunched, then yeah, you can even nuke it. It is what it is. It's not the best bet, but you're better off eating some frozen nuked vegetables than you would be going grabbing a McDonald's or a pizza. So you gotta pick and choose your battles. So in the event that you can't grow your own vegetables, in the event that you're not getting it from a local farmer's market, so you know how fresh it is, in the event that, you just don't have the time to prepare everything properly, then yes, frozen vegetables are going to be a good idea. Frozen fruits are going to be a good idea. The vast majority of the nutrients are either maintained or even increased through the mechanisms we talked about in the study today, and potentially other ones, but those are the ones they proposed. And overall, yeah, good bet. The green, so the cruciferous vegetables, the berries, you're going to see a good increase. Carrots, if you're looking for that beta carotene and you're expecting it to be still super high from the frozen, don't really hold your breath on that. Other than that, you're going to see some good benefit. But yeah, I'm going to ask for any last questions. We might call this one a little bit early. It's about 40 minutes that we did for this one tonight, but there's no real questions. We actually breezed through this one faster than I was expecting. I forgot the vast majority of this here paper in particular was methods, and the methods were pretty intensive. So, yeah. Any last questions? Otherwise, Fire Cream should be here any day now. Six Barrel Podcast, that did drop my appearance from about 2 weeks ago, so you can go check that out over on their YouTube. Obviously, you can like and subscribe over on YouTube. Greatly appreciated. We've been growing over there again and pretty steadily. And interestingly, my Tiger Nuts video just keeps growing and growing and growing, and God knows how that's happening, but whatever. And yeah, that being said, guys, I'll see you next week.